There was a wall in New York City where dinner arrived behind a pane of glass, and a nickel was the only password you needed. No waiter. Just rows of little chrome doors each, one holding a warm plate that somebody's hands had set there minutes before, and a slot that clicked when your coin dropped just right. That building was the Automat, and for almost 70 years it fed this country lunch. But here's the question nobody quite answers. How does an entire way of eating just disappear, recipes and all, like it was never sitting in Times Square at all? By the end of this list, you'll understand why the click of that little glass door meant something bigger than a hot meal, and why it vanished the moment America stopped wanting to be surprised by dinner. There are 25 foods that built that wall, and every single one still lives in somebody's memory. Let's open the doors. Baked beans in the crock. Down at the far end of the wall sat a squat brown crock, sweet with molasses and salt pork, bubbling under a skin gone dark and glossy in the oven. You'd feed your nickel in, hear the click, and the door would swing open onto something that tasted like a church supper. Horn and Hardart built its reputation on dishes like this one, food that reminded a stranger of somebody's grandmother. When frozen dinners hit supermarket freezers in the 50s, that crock lost to convenience nobody had to walk downtown for. Boston brown bread, steamed dark and dense in a can, sliced into thick brown rounds studded with raisins, Boston brown bread sat behind its own door like a secret. It was food a Depression-era customer could stretch across a whole afternoon with just coffee, filling enough to count as dinner for a man counting his last quarter. As wages rose and appetites shifted toward steak and shrimp cocktail, humble steamed bread quietly disappeared from American plates altogether. Behind door 23, 2 split francs sat nestled in a puddle of baked beans, simple as a Sunday supper and just as comforting. Automat regulars called it the working man's plate, worth every coin in your pocket on a cold February night in Manhattan. The dish traveled well because Horn and Hardart owned its own commissary kitchens, cranking out thousands of identical trays each morning. Once fast food chains figured out how to sell a hot dog even faster and cheaper, that little glass door started collecting dust. Thick, green, and almost sweet with ham hock, the pea soup came in a small cup that steamed against the cold glass door in winter. Regulars swore the Automat's version beat their own mothers, stretched with split peas and bone broth, until it fed a crowd on a 5-cent economy. When soup companies started canning identical versions for the home pantry, there was no reason left to walk 6 blocks for a cup. New England clam chowder, creamy, studded with potato and clam, the chowder arrived in a little crock that fogged the glass with steam every time the kitchen refilled it. Fridays were chowder days for New York's Catholic office workers, and the line would stretch halfway down the block by noon, tasting like the coast even blocks from any ocean. Once frozen seafood dinners arrived in supermarkets, home cooks realized they could recreate that same bowl without ever leaving the kitchen. Corn muffins, golden, split, and dripping with a pat of butter that melted the second it hit the warm crumb, the corn muffin was the Automat's answer to breakfast on the run. Office girls grabbed one wrapped in a napkin on their way to the elevator, coffee in the other hand, sweet enough to feel like a treat and cheap enough to buy every morning. Once coffee shops and diners started giving away a muffin with the price of a cup, the Automat's version lost its edge. Egg salad sandwich, cut into neat white bread triangles, the egg salad sandwich sat stacked 3 high behind its glass door, mayonnaise glistening at the crust. It was lunch counter food dressed up just enough to feel proper, the kind a secretary could eat at her desk without embarrassment, made fresh each morning in commissary kitchens uptown. When delis on every corner started selling the same sandwich for a dime less, the Automat's advantage quietly evaporated. Ham salad sandwich. Pink and finely ground, bound with just enough mustard to cut the sweetness, the ham salad sandwich was the working man's answer to a proper lunch. You could see it through the glass, wrapped tight in wax paper, waiting for a coin that would make the little door swing open. Stock turning over so fast, nothing sat more than a few hours. Once vending machines started selling pre-packaged sandwiches everywhere from bus terminals to office lobbies, the novelty of the wall wore thin. Macaroni salad, cool creamy, flecked with pimento and diced celery for crunch, the macaroni salad was a summer staple behind the glass. New Yorkers picked it up alongside a sandwich for a full meal under $1, tasting like a picnic in the middle of midtown traffic. As backyard barbecues and church potlucks became the place people expected that dish, the Automat's version simply stopped standing out. Deviled eggs, 2 halves per order, yolks whipped smooth with mustard and a dusting of paprika. Deviled eggs sat in neat rows behind their own little door like jewelry in a case. They were the fanciest thing a nickel could buy. A small luxury office workers treated themselves to the way someone else might buy a magazine. When party trays and grocery deli counters started selling them by the dozen, the Automat's single-serving charm lost its reason to exist. Creamed chipped beef on toast, salty dried beef folded into a white cream sauce, ladled hot over 2 triangles of toast. This dish carried a nickname from every soldier who'd eaten army rations of the same thing. Civilians ordered it anyway because the Automat version tasted better than anything a mess hall ever produced, rich and filling in a way that somehow made it more beloved. Once home cooks got hold of easy cream of mushroom recipes in the 50s, chipped beef on toast became a kitchen staple instead of a downtown outing. Salisbury steak, a hand-formed patty of ground beef, smothered in dark mushroom gravy and sitting proud on its own little plate, Salisbury steak was as close to a proper dinner as the Automat sold. It had the weight of a restaurant meal at a fraction of the price, gravy pooling into a scoop of mashed potato if you'd ordered 1, 2, and families treated a Salisbury steak night as a small celebration. When TV dinner trays put the exact same dish in supermarket freezers, the wall lost one of its signature plates. Yankee pot roast, slow-braised beef, fork tender and sliced thick, sitting in a pool of its own dark gravy alongside carrots and a boiled potato. The pot roast was Sunday dinner every day of the week. It smelled like somebody's kitchen the moment the door swung open. Braised overnight in enormous commissary batches no home cook could match easily. As suburban families moved away from downtown lunch counters altogether, that particular comfort followed them home instead. Chicken pot pie, golden flaky crust concealing chunks of chicken, carrot, and peas, suspended in thick gravy, the pot pie was arguably the Automat's most photographed dish. Steam escaping the moment a fork broke the crust. It arrived in its own little tin, individual and personal, in a way cafeteria food rarely managed. Kids begged their parents for a whole trip downtown just to eat one. Once, Swanson introduced the frozen pot pie for supermarket freezers in 1951. That same golden crust became something you baked at home in 25 minutes flat. Beef stew, chunks of beef, potato, and carrot swimming in a dark, peppery gravy. The beef stew behind door 11 was proof the Automat never cut corners on the basics. It sat bubbling gently under a heat lamp, and regulars claimed you could smell it from the sidewalk on a cold day. It was the kind of dish that made a stranger feel like they'd been fed by someone who cared. As canned stew brands perfected the same flavor for pennies on the dollar, there was less reason to walk 6 blocks and drop a coin for it. Fish cakes with tartar sauce, crisp on the outside, flaky and mild within. The fish cakes appeared every Friday without fail for New York's Catholic customers observing meatless days. A dollop of tartar sauce sat on the side, tangy enough to cut through the fry. The Automat timed its Friday batches perfectly, and lines would form early, coins already warm in gloved hands. Once fast food chains rolled out their own fish sandwiches in the following decades, the ritual of a Friday Automat lunch lost its last remaining reason to exist. Bubbling under a golden, slightly crisped top, The macaroni and cheese was maybe the single most beloved dish on the whole wall, thick with sharp cheddar sauce and baked in individual portions. Kids pressed their faces to the glass watching the little door before their parents even fed the slot. It tasted rich in a way that felt like an indulgence, even though it cost next to nothing. When boxed macaroni and cheese took over grocery shelves in the post-war years, that exact same comfort became a 5-minute stovetop dinner instead of a subway ride. Creamed spinach, deep green, silky, and rich with cream and a whisper of nutmeg, the creamed spinach was the vegetable dish that made even reluctant eaters clean their plate. It sat glossy behind the glass, spoon marks still visible from the kitchen worker who'd portioned it minutes before. New Yorkers ordered it as a side to nearly everything on the wall, a little luxury dressed as a vegetable. As frozen creamed spinach became a supermarket staple through the 50s, that particular experience of watching it through glass simply stopped being necessary. Baked apples. Whole apples cored and stuffed with brown sugar and a pat of butter, baked until the skin split and the juice pooled thick and amber at the bottom of the dish. The baked apple was dessert that still felt like something wholesome. Steam fogged the little door every time, and the smell of cinnamon drifted down the whole row of machines. It tasted like autumn no matter what month it actually was outside. As home ovens got more reliable and recipe cards spread the dish everywhere, there was no mystery left worth a subway fare. Huckleberry pie. Purple-black filling bursting through a golden lattice crust. Huckleberry pie was the Automat's rarest treasure. Made from berries shipped in from Maine and the Pacific Northwest when they were in season. Regulars would ask the counter staff which pies had come in that morning, treating the answer like insider information. It tasted wilder and tarter than blueberry, a flavor city dwellers rarely encountered anywhere else. As huckleberries became harder and pricier to source at scale, the Automat quietly swapped it for blueberry, and a small piece of the wall's magic went with it. Coconut custard pie. Silky egg custard studded with toasted coconut shavings, set in a crisp shell and dusted with a little extra coconut on top. This pie sat in the case like a small trophy. It was rich without being cloying, the kind of dessert a regular ordered every single visit, without ever getting tired of it. Bakers at the commissary turned out hundreds each morning, and by early afternoon the case was often already empty. When supermarket bakeries started selling a nearly identical pie whole, for the same price as 2 Automat slices, the math simply stopped making sense. Apple pie. Cinnamon-heavy, packed tight with tender apple slices, and topped with a crimped golden crust, the apple pie behind door 4 was as close to a national anthem as dessert got. Soldiers home from the war ordered it first, before coffee, before anything else on the wall. It tasted like the country was supposed to taste, warm and familiar no matter what borough you'd grown up in. As diners and coffee shops spread across every American town with their own slice of pie on the counter, the Automat lost its monopoly on that particular feeling. Creamy, studded with plump raisins and a dusting of cinnamon across the top, rice pudding sat in small glass cups that regulars grabbed almost as an afterthought, then finished before they'd even sat down. It tasted like something a grandmother had made that morning, sweet without being heavy. Office workers ordered it as a reward for finishing a hard morning of typing or filing. As packaged pudding cups arrived on supermarket shelves through the 60s, a dessert that once required a special trip became something already waiting in the refrigerator at home. Cinnamon buns, warm, glazed, and pulled apart in sticky spiraled layers, the cinnamon bun was the smell that greeted you before you even saw the wall. Drifting out onto the sidewalk and pulling strangers in off the street. Bakers iced them fresh each morning, and the ones bought first, still warm from the oven, became the stuff of local legend. It cost a nickel and felt like a small piece of luxury before 9 in the morning. As chain bakeries, and later shopping mall pretzel and bun stands, copied the same warm smell strategy, the Automat's signature scent stopped being unique to just one address. Coffee from the dolphin head spouts. And here's the one everybody remembers first, even before the food. Brass dolphin heads mounted along the wall, coffee streaming out in a perfect steady arc the second you slid your cup beneath it. Nobody ever quite figured out how they got that stream so consistent, and Horn and Hardart guarded the exact mechanism like a state secret. It was the ritual that tied every single dish on this list together, the reason people lingered at their little marble tables instead of rushing back to the office. When drip coffee makers and, later, chain coffee shops made a decent cup available on every corner, the mystery of that dolphin spout stopped being worth chasing downtown for. That's the real reason the Automat disappeared. Not bad food, not bad prices, but a country that stopped needing to be surprised by a wall of little glass doors once the surprise showed up in the freezer aisle and on the coffee maker at home. The last Horn and Hardart Automat in New York closed its doors in 1991, and with it went a whole way of eating lunch in public, alone but never really alone. Coins clicking in dozens of hands at once. If your grandparents ever told you about that click of the door and the dolphin spout coffee, drop the story in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more forgotten pieces of American history.